All right, good?
Ready.
Let's do it. What's up, Collide? My name is Justin, and I want to start by wishing each of you a happy Easter. I'm so glad that you're hanging out with us on today, which was what I think is the most important holiday in history. It's the most important holiday because it's the holiday that is centered around the death and the resurrection of Jesus. The death and the resurrection that paid all of our debts and forgave us for our sins. Man, this holiday represents Jesus paving a way for us to spend eternity in heaven, and that is worth celebrating. So that's what we're talking about today, but I want to catch you up on the last few weeks if you're new to our Collide family. You see, the last few weeks, in anticipation of Easter, we've been studying the moments in history where Jesus was on the cross being crucified. But here's the thing to understand. Jesus was falsely accused of the crimes that landed him on the cross. You see, he was innocent and still being killed. And I don't know about you, but that's a bummer. I would be really frustrated if I was Jesus in this moment. But as we've looked closer at this moment with Jesus on the cross, we've noticed that Jesus used his time on the cross to pray. He spent the most frustrating, painful, and unjust moment of his life and maybe history. He spent that moment praying. And in the first 2 weeks of this study, we've kind of looked and we've seen that Jesus prayed for his enemies from the cross, and that Jesus prayed when God felt far away from the cross. And these are radical prayers when you consider the context in which Jesus prayed them. So I want to do something a little different today, and I actually want to pause right now so we can talk, so you can talk with your group about these first two prayers of Jesus, and then we'll come back together to talk about the last one. Ready? Let's go. All right, let's bring it back in. You guys ready? Let's talk about the final prayer that Jesus prayed from the cross. This final prayer from Jesus can be found in the biblical book of Luke, and I want to open together. So let's open up to Luke 23:46 and read together this final prayer from the cross that Jesus prays. Then Jesus shouted, "Father, I entrust my spirit into your hands." And with those words, he breathed his last. Seems like a pretty simple prayer, right? But again, you got to remember the context of this moment. This man, Jesus, who lived a perfect life, is dying the death of a criminal. And in that moment, Jesus prayed and trusted God, even on his worst day. You ever have a bad day? Like when your team lost the big game, or when the dynamic in your family changes and you get the feeling it kind of changed forever, or when you get caught in a really big lie. I know I've had a couple days that would compete for the title of Justin's worst day. And if I can be totally honest with you, Collide, I didn't sound like Jesus sounded in this prayer, or at least not often. See, I usually sound more like, "Father, can you just sit back and let me handle this? I'll figure this out. I don't really need any help," right? Not, "Father, I trust you with my spirit." And man, maybe you can relate. Maybe you sound like me on your bad days more than sounding like Jesus, but Jesus is showing us a better way here. Jesus is showing us that even when everything that you can see is the worst, as bad as it could be, Jesus is showing us that God's got better for us. I mean, think about this. Put yourself in Jesus' shoes, or sandals. Put yourself in the perspective of Jesus. What was right in front of Jesus in the story of his death? If you read through, Jesus was mocked. Jesus was beaten. He was called a liar. Jesus had his hands and his feet nailed to the cross. There was nothing good about the things happening to Jesus in that moment. But Jesus trusted God on his worst day. Jesus trusted that what he was experiencing was still a part of God's plan. Jesus trusted that God's spirit would raise him from the dead. Jesus trusted that God would use his death and resurrection to save all of humanity from our sins. And Jesus trusted that God still loved him even though there were bad things happening to him. And man, I don't know where you stand with Jesus or if you follow Jesus, but this is why I follow Jesus. Because of the example that he sets for us, even on unimaginably bad days. On Jesus' worst day, he prayed for those who opposed him. He prayed to a God that felt extremely far away, and he trusted God's plan. Jesus prayed and he said, "God, I'm in your hands. I trust you." Is that something that you've prayed? Did you know you can pray that prayer even on your worst day because of what Jesus did on the cross? In the middle of everything going wrong, you can talk to God. In the middle of being an imperfect person who gets it wrong sometimes or a lot of times, you can talk to God. In the middle of your worst day, you can pray and say, "God, I live in a broken world full of things and people that just doesn't feel right. Including myself, I make mistakes, and none of this makes sense to me. But I'm in your hands. I trust you with my spirit. I trust your plan." This Easter, I hope you know that part of the good news of Jesus and the good news of Easter is that we don't have to have it all figured out to have a relationship with God. We can just trust his plan. And for some of us, the best thing we can do this Easter is to trust Jesus for the first time, to acknowledge that you're imperfect, to thank Jesus for the sacrifice he made on the cross, and for the first time ever, just trust that he's forgiven you. Trust in his plan. But for some of us, we've prayed that prayer before. And maybe this Easter, we've stopped truly trusting God with our day-to-day lives. We sound way less like, "Father, I trust you with my spirit," and way more like, "Father, I've got this." See, trusting God's plan for our lives is something that Jesus modeled for us on the cross by praying and trusting God on his worst day. But the thing about trusting God is it's not just a one-time thing. It's not just a one-time okay, I trust him and now I'm gonna go to heaven. Woo. Like, that's true, but it's also an everyday. All right, I'm trusting God. I'm trusting God's plan, which means that I have hope that can't be shaken by the things going on around me because it's not dependent on the things going on around me. That's the hope of Easter. That's the hope of following Jesus. So Collide family, let's make today a day that we look back on and can say that our lives were different from this moment on because of our commitment to praying like Jesus. I love you guys, and happy Easter.